Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was adopted by Magneto and raised among mutants. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The sun, a benevolent tyrant in the cloudless sky, baked the dust of the Mutants Municipal Park. It was a day like any other, painted in the primary colors of childhood, the bright red of the slide, the cheerful yellow of the swings, the deep green of the manicured bushes. For most of the children scattered across the playground, the world was a simple, glorious place, measured in the height of a swing's arc or the thrill of a successful game of tag. For 4-year-old Izuku Midoriya, the world was measured in the inches between himself and his tormentor. He stood on trembling legs, a scarecrow made of scraped knees and a heroic heart far too large for his small frame. His arms were outstretched, a flimsy, shaking barrier protecting another boy who was crumpled on the ground behind him, sobbing. Izuku's own tears traced clean paths through the grime on his cheeks, but his expression was one of desperate, unyielding defiance. His green eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on the figure before him. Katsuki Bakugo, even at 4, carried himself with the swagger of a conqueror. His hands, held open, popped and fizzed with miniature explosions, the sound like a string of firecrackers. The smell of burned sugar, of nitroglycerin-like sweat, clung to the air around him. He wasn't just a boy with a powerful quirk, he was the sun around which all the other children in the neighborhood orbited. Still want to play hero, Deku? Bakugo sneered, the cruel nickname already a well-worn tool. It meant useless, one who can't do anything, and in a world where 80% of the population was born with a superpower, a quirkless boy like Izuku was the definition of useless. Stop it, Kaken! Izuku's voice was a reedy whisper, nearly lost in the ambient noise of the park. You're making him cry. If you don't stop, I'll never forgive you! It was a child's threat, utterly devoid of menace, yet it was all he had. He had no power to back it up, no crackling energy in his fists, no monstrous transformation to call upon. He had only his will, a fragile shield against a world of fists and fire. Bakugo and his 2 sycophantic followers laughed. It was a harsh, mocking sound that made Izuku flinch. Even without a quirk, you're still trying to talk back to me? You really are a Deku! With a final, explosive pop from his palm, Bakugo lunged forward. From the cool shade of a sprawling ginkgo tree, a man watched. He had not come to Japan to observe the brutish games of children. His purpose was far graver. Reports from his contacts had spoken of an unusual concentration of high-level quirk manifestations in this region, phenomena that flirted with the Omega classification his own kind used. He had come expecting to find nascent mutants, potential brothers and sisters in need of guidance, or perhaps, a threat that needed to be pruned before it could grow. Instead, he had found this. A microcosm of the world's sickness. Eric Lencher was a man out of time and place. Dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit, he stood with a stillness that was more commanding than any movement. His face was a road map of a hard-lived life, lined with sorrows and convictions etched into his features. His eyes, a pale, piercing gray, held the cold weight of history. They had seen ghettos and concentration camps, the rise and fall of nations, and the bottomless well of human cruelty. At first, the scene before him was depressingly familiar. The strong, gifted with power they did not earn, preying on the weak. The boy with the explosive hands was a common archetype, arrogant, entitled, his power a substitute for character. Eric felt a familiar flicker of contempt. This was what humanity did with its gifts. It used them to dominate, to bully, to establish pecking orders based on the lottery of genetics. The society of quirks was no different from the society of men. It was just more garish. He was about to turn away, to dismiss it, and continue his true mission, when something held him. It was the other boy. The one with the wild green hair, and the tear-streaked face. The quirkless one. The boy was terrified. Eric could see it in the frantic pulse in his thin neck, the way his small body shuddered with each sob. Yet he did not run. He stood his ground, a shield of flesh and bone, protecting someone else. He had been knocked down once already. Eric had seen it, and his shorts were torn at the knee, revealing a raw, bloody scrape. Still he stood. Bakugo's fist, wreathed in a small, sharp explosion, connected with Izuku's cheek. The blow was more flash and noise than substance, but it was enough. Izuku crumpled to the ground, landing hard in the dusty sandbox. The other little boy, the one he had been protecting, scrambled to his feet and ran away without a backward glance. Bakugo loomed over Izuku's prone form. See? You can't do anything. You're less than nothing. He and his friends sauntered off, their laughter trailing behind them, confident in their victory. For a long moment, Izuku didn't move. Eric watched, a cold knot in his stomach. He expected the boy to curl into a ball, to finally break down into the storm of tears he had been holding back. He expected the surrender, the acceptance of his place in the world. It was the way of things. The weak yield to the strong. But then, the boy stirred. With a pained groan, he pushed himself up onto his hands and knees. His head was bowed, dark green curls hiding his face. His shoulders shook, and Eric assumed he was finally weeping, but the sound that reached him was not a sob. It was a choked, guttural gasp for air. Slowly, agonizingly, Izuku Midoriya got back to his feet. He swayed, one hand coming up to touch his stinging cheek. He looked at the empty space where the other boy had been, then at the retreating forms of his tormentors. And in his eyes, Eric Lencher saw it. It wasn't hatred. It wasn't a lust for revenge. It was something far purer, and infinitely more powerful. It was a profound, soul-deep sorrow that this injustice had occurred. It was the unwavering belief that it was wrong. And beneath that sorrow was a sliver of diamond, a will so hard and so absolute that it had refused to shatter, even when the body that housed it had been broken. In that small, corkless child, covered in dirt and tears, Eric saw a ghost. He saw a young Jewish boy in Poland, standing before men with guns and sneers, possessing nothing but the fierce, desperate will to survive, to protect, to endure. He saw the raw material not of a victim, but of a survivor. A leader. The investigation could wait. A new, far more important mission had just presented itself. The water in the bathtub was warm, tinged pink from the antiseptic Inko Midoriya gently dabbed onto her son's scrapes. Izuku sat silently, his favorite All Might-themed bath toy floating forgotten beside him. His face was a mess of blossoming bruises, a faint purple already darkening his cheekbone. Inko's heart felt like a lead weight in her chest. Each time this happened, and it was happening more and more often, a piece of her broke. When the doctor had delivered the diagnosis, the 2 joints in his pinky toe sealing his fate, she had cried and apologized, over and over. "I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry." She had been apologizing for his lack of a quirk. Now, she understood she should have been apologizing for the world he was being forced to live in without one. "Does it still hurt?" she asked, her voice soft and thick with unshed tears. Izuku shook his head, though he winced when she cleaned a cut on his elbow. He hadn't cried since he got home. He'd simply walked in, set his little yellow backpack down, and looked up at her with those devastatingly earnest eyes. That was worse than the tears. The quiet acceptance of his daily pain was a burden no 4-year-old should carry. After his bath, she dressed him in his All Might onesie, the one with the little fabric tufts that mimicked the hero's iconic hairstyle. He immediately went to the computer, his small fingers clacking on the keyboard as he pulled up the video. The grainy footage of All Might's debut filled the small apartment with sounds of explosions, crumbling buildings, and the hero's booming laughter. "It's fine now." "Why?" "Because I am here." Izuku watched, his expression rapt, his bruised face illuminated by the screen's glow. He was memorizing it, internalizing it. Not just the power, Inko realized, but the promise. The promise of a world where people were saved, where bullies didn't win, where someone strong stood up for those who couldn't. He wasn't just a fan, he was a devout follower of a faith, and its core tenet was hope. A hope that the world, day after day, seemed determined to beat out of him. What kind of future can he have? The thought was a constant, unwelcome guest in her mind. A world of heroes and villains had no place for the powerless. He would be a bystander at best, a victim at worst. His dream of being a hero was a beautiful, innocent fantasy that would one day curdle into bitter resentment. She could protect him with bandages and warm meals now, but she couldn't protect him from the future. The doorbell rang, a sharp, unexpected chime that broke the spell of the video. Inko frowned. She wasn't expecting anyone. Wiping her hands on her apron, she went to the door and peered through the peephole. A tall man stood in the hallway. He was a foreigner, with sharp, aristocratic features and silvering hair at his temples. He was dressed in a suit that cost more than her rent for a year. He looked less like a salesman and more like a diplomat or a CEO. There was an aura of quiet, immense power about him that was deeply unsettling. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. "Mrs. Midoriya?" His voice was deep, cultured, with a faint, unplaceable European accent. It carried through the door with perfect clarity. "My name is Eric Lencher. I would like to speak with you about your son Izuku." "Please, I assure you, I mean you no harm." Her blood ran cold. How did he know their names? Her first instinct was to call the police. But something in his voice, a strange lack of malice, a calm sincerity, made her pause. Against her better judgment, she slowly unlatched the door, opening it only a crack. The man did not try to force his way in. He simply stood there, his gray eyes meeting hers. They were old eyes, filled with a gravity that was both intimidating and strangely reassuring. "May I come in?" he asked. "I saw what happened at the park today. I believe we have a great deal to discuss." Inko's hands trembled as she set a cup of green tea on the small table in front of her guest. The man, Mr. Lencher, had removed his shoes at the door without being asked and now sat perfectly straight on her worn sofa, looking entirely out of place and yet completely at ease. Izuku had been sent to his room to play, the door left slightly ajar. "I don't understand," Inko began, wringing her hands in her lap. "Who are you? Why were you watching my son?" Eric took a slow, deliberate sip of the tea. "Your tea is excellent, thank you," he said, his voice calm and measured. It was a disarming tactic, setting a tone of civility in a situation that felt anything but. "To answer your question, I am an educator. A recruiter of a sort. I search for children with unique potential, and I was not watching your son, specifically. I was observing the social dynamics of a quirk-based society when your son's extraordinary character captured my full attention." "Character?" Inko was bewildered. He was being beaten up. He's quirkless." She said the word like a diagnosis of a terminal illness. "Yes," Eric said, his gaze sharp and intense. "He is. And that is precisely what makes him so remarkable. I watched a dozen children in that park. All of them, save one, possess some minor genetic gift. They are part of the majority. They will live their lives being told they are special simply for being born. But your son was born with nothing but his own spirit. And with that spirit alone, he faced down a power he could not hope to match, not for himself, but for another. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Inko could only stare. No one had ever spoken about Izuku's quirklessness as anything other than a deficiency, a tragedy. Eric leaned forward slightly, his presence filling the small room. "Mrs. Midoriya, tell me, what future do you see for him in this world? He is a boy with the heart of a lion, trapped in the body of a lamb, living in a jungle where only the predators are celebrated. He dreams of being a hero, does he not?" She nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "And society will tell him, every single day, that he cannot. His teachers, his peers, the world itself will grind him down. They will mock his dreams, punish his courage, and teach him that his only value is as a spectator. They will take that magnificent will of his and try to crush it until he accepts his place as one of the powerless. They will call him Deku until he believes it." Every word was a hammer blow, striking the very core of Inko's deepest fears. He was voicing the secret, terrible monologue that played in her mind every night. What do you want?" she whispered. "I want to offer him a different path," Eric said, his voice lowering, becoming persuasive, almost hypnotic. "I run a school. A sanctuary, on an island nation called Genosha. It is a place for those who are different. A place for those the world would cast out. There, we do not measure a person's worth by the power they are born with. We measure it by their intellect, their loyalty, their strength of character. We measure it by their will." He paused, letting the words sink in. "On Genosha, your son would not be quirkless. He would simply be Izuku. He would be taught history, science, and philosophy. He would be trained physically, to make his body as strong as his spirit. He would learn strategy and engineering. We would not give him a power he does not have. We would forge the power he already possesses, his mind, his courage, into an unbreakable weapon. He would be surrounded by peers who understand what it means to be feared and ostracized. He would never be a victim again. I would see to it personally. Inko's mind reeled. An island? A special school? It sounded like a fantasy, a man's proposition. You want to take my son away from me. I want to give your son a future. Eric corrected gently. This world will chew him up and spit him out. It will break his heart, then his spirit, then perhaps his body. He will either become a bitter, broken man, or he will die on his feet, defending an ideal that this society only pays lip service to. I am offering a third option, a chance for him to become the leader he was born to be, in a place that will value him, not pity him. The conviction in his voice was absolute. He wasn't lying. Inko's intuition, the powerful, primal instinct of a mother, told her that this man, for all his strangeness, believed every word he was saying, and the terrifying part was, she believed him too. He had painted a picture of Izuku's future that was so bleakly, horribly accurate. Why? She asked, her voice cracking. Why him? Eric's expression softened for the first time, a flicker of ancient pain crossing his features. Because I was once a boy like him, he said softly, powerless, facing a world that had decided I was less than human. I know the fire that forges a soul in such a crucible. I see that same fire in your son. To allow it to be extinguished by the petty cruelty of this world would be an unforgivable crime. Tears began to stream down Inko's face. The choice he was presenting was impossible. A life with her, filled with love but also with guaranteed pain, humiliation, and danger, or a life without her, in an unknown place, but with the promise of strength, respect, and a future. It was a choice between her own heart and her son's soul. He's just a baby, she sobbed. He is a child now. Eric agreed, his voice losing its persuasive edge and becoming one of quiet, final truth. But he will not be a child forever. The world will force him to grow up. The question is, Mrs. Midoriya, into what? A hero who is told he cannot be? Or a leader who will be taught how to change the world? He stood, his tall frame seeming to eclipse the small apartment. The greatest act of a parent is to give their child the future they deserve, even if it is not the one they imagined. The decision is yours. I will be in Japan for 2 more days. You know how to find me. He placed a simple, elegant business card on the table. It bore only a name, Eric Lencher, and a phone number. With a slight, respectful bow, he let himself out, leaving Inko Midoriya alone in the sudden, crushing silence of her apartment, the weight of 2 futures resting on her shoulders. For 2 days, Inko was a ghost. She cooked meals her son barely touched, and that she couldn't bring herself to eat. She watched him sleep, his face peaceful and unbruised in the soft glow of his all-might light, and she wept silently. She tried to imagine his life. She saw him in middle school, the last quirkless child, a target for every bully. She saw him in high school, his heroic dreams dismissed as pathetic delusions. She saw the light in his eyes slowly dimming, replaced by the hard, dull sheen of resignation. She saw him as a man, working a menial job, looking up at the sky as heroes flew past, his heart aching with the ghost of a dream he was forced to abandon. Then, she imagined the other path. A boy, strong and confident. A young man, his mind sharp as a razor, his body a finely tuned instrument. Surrounded by friends who respected him for who he was, learning, growing, becoming someone who could not be hurt, who could not be dismissed. Becoming someone who could protect others, just as he had always wanted. The thought of him being so far away, of missing his birthdays, of not being there to kiss his scrapes better, was a physical agony. It felt like tearing a part of herself away. But the thought of him staying, of watching the world slowly crush the most beautiful thing about him, his spirit, was infinitely worse. On the 2nd day, her hand shaking so badly she could barely dial, she made the call. She explained it to Izuku as a grand adventure. A special school, for very brave kids far away. A place where he could learn to be a hero, just in a different way. He was 4. To him, far away was an abstract concept. He was more concerned about whether he could take his all-might action figures. He cried when he hugged her goodbye, but they were the tears of a child leaving for a long summer camp, not the tears of a boy leaving his life behind. The real, soul-shattering tears were hers. She stood at the door, watching him walk down the hallway, his little hand completely enveloped in Eric Lencher's large one. He was so small. He turned back once, and waved, a bright, hopeful smile on his face. Inko forced a smile back, waving until they turned the corner and were gone. The moment they were out of sight, her strength gave out. She slid down the wall, her body racked with sobs, the sound raw and broken in the empty apartment. She had just given away her entire world, all for the hope of a promise from a stranger. The inside of the private jet was a world away from the cramped Midoriya apartment. The seats were plush leather, the cabin silent save for the low hum of the engines. Izuku pressed his face against the thick, cool glass of the window, watching the city lights of Japan spread out below them like a carpet of scattered jewels. It was beautiful, and it was shrinking with every passing second. He felt a strange mix of excitement and a tiny, gnawing ache in his chest that he didn't understand. It was the first pang of homesickness. Eric sat opposite him, observing him with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. He had been quiet for most of the journey from the apartment to the private airfield, allowing the boy time to process. Now, as they ascended into the dark sky, he felt it was time for the first lesson to begin. "Tell me, Izuku," he began, his voice calm and even. "That name the other children called you. Deku. You know what it means, do you not?" Izuku's shoulders slumped. He pulled away from the window, his gaze dropping to his scuffed red sneakers. "It means I'm useless. Because I don't have a quirk. That is the meaning they have assigned to it," Eric corrected. "Words are tools, Izuku. Their meaning is shaped by the one who wields them. A hammer can be used to build a house or to crush a skull. The object is the same, only the intent changes." He leaned forward, his gray eyes locking with Izuku's wide, green ones. "They called you useless because you lacked the power they were born with. They judged you by their own limited, shallow metric. They were wrong. I watched you that day. I saw a power in you that boy with his explosions could not possibly comprehend." Izuku looked up, his expression a mixture of confusion and fragile hope. "But I don't have a power." "You do," Eric stated with absolute certainty. "You have the will to stand when every instinct tells you to flee. You have the courage to shield another at your own expense. You have the heart to believe in justice in a world that is fundamentally unjust. These are not gifts of genetics, Izuku. They are gifts of the soul. They are powers that must be earned, honed, and mastered. They are far more valuable than the ability to make things explode." He gestured out the window, at the fading lights of the country they were leaving behind. "That world down there will never understand you. It will try to make you weak, because your strength of character is an indictment of its own failings. But we are not going to let that happen." He reached across, his hand surprisingly gentle as he placed it on Izuku's small shoulder. The boy looked up at him, his tear-filled eyes reflecting the cabin lights. "They called you Deku, the useless one," Eric said, his voice a low, powerful rumble that vibrated with conviction. "From this day forward, that name will have a new meaning. It will be the name of someone who can do anything. It will be a reminder not of what you lack, but of the will that allows you to overcome it. I will teach you that the will to act is the most powerful gift of all." He gave the boy's shoulder a firm squeeze. "You are not a victim. You are not weak. You are my student. You will be my protégé. You will be my son." A single tear escaped Izuku's eye and rolled down his cheek, but it was not a tear of sadness. It was a tear of release, of a burden he didn't even know he was carrying suddenly being lifted. For the first time, someone had looked at him, at his quirkless, broken self, and had not seen something to be pitied. They had seen something to be valued. "You will be my Izuku." As the jet broke through the cloud cover, leaving the world he knew behind for a sky full of stars, Izuku Midoriya took his first step onto a new path. A path forged not by destiny or genetics, but by a single, defiant choice made in a dusty park. A path that would lead him far from the light of the symbol of peace and into the complex, dangerous, and loving shadow of the master of magnetism. The Jinshan sun was a different beast from the one that had warmed the playgrounds of Muzurifu. It was sharper, hotter, reflecting off the polished chrome and alien architecture of the city with a fierce, white glare. Below, the capital city hummed with a unique energy, a fusion of advanced technology, and the ever-present thrum of 1,000 different powers working in concert. It was a symphony of creation and controlled chaos, a testament to one man's indomitable will. And at the heart of this nation, in a state-of-the-art training facility known as the Crucible, a different kind of will was being tested. 15-year-old Izuku Midoriya moved like a whisper. His body, once small and frail, was now a compact bundle of lean muscle and coiled energy, honed by a decade of relentless conditioning. He wore simple black training fatigues, his wild green hair now cut shorter, more disciplined, though a few stubborn curls still fell across his brow. Sweat plastered his bangs to his forehead, and his green eyes, no longer wide with childish wonder, were narrowed in absolute focus. They darted from point to point, analyzing, calculating, processing. His opponents were 3 acolytes in training. The first, a bulky young man named Rock, could generate localized gravity wells, making the ground beneath his target feel like quicksand. The second, a swift girl named Vela, could teleport in short, disorienting bursts. The third, Kale, was a low-level pyrokinetic, capable of launching searing bolts of flame. Separately, they were a challenge. Together, they were a tactical nightmare. For anyone else, "He's just a human, you 3. A voice drawled from the observation deck above. "Try not to make this too embarrassing." Lorna Dane, Polaris, leaned against the railing, her own long, green hair a striking echo of Izuku's. A wry smirk played on her lips, but her emerald eyes, glowing with latent magnetic power, missed nothing. She was his training overseer, his self-appointed, perpetually unimpressed older sister, and one of the few people on the island he truly trusted. Rock grunted, slamming his palms on the durasteel floor. A wave of force rippled towards Izuku. The air around Izuku grew heavy, the pull of the earth suddenly tripling. Most would have been crushed to their knees. Izuku, however, had drilled this scenario 1,000 times. He didn't fight the gravity, he yielded to it. He dropped into a low crouch, his center of gravity lowering as he drew 2 small, metallic discs from his belt. Vela blinked into existence behind him, a superheated knife in her hand. Izuku didn't turn. His eyes were on the reflection in a polished wall panel to his left. He mapped the entire room's reflective surfaces the moment the exercise began. 3, 2, 1. As Vela lunged, Kale unleashed a torrent of fire from the front, a pincer move designed to incinerate him. Right on schedule, Izuku acted. He threw the 2 discs into the air. With a tap on his wrist-mounted controller, the first disc projected a hard light shield, just thick enough to absorb the brunt of Kale's fire. It wouldn't last, but it didn't need to. The second disc, an electromagnetic pulse emitter of his own design, flashed with a brilliant blue light. The EMP had no effect on the mutants themselves, but it momentarily scrambled Vela's neural pathways, the bioelectric signals that governed her teleportation. Her blink fizzled. She stumbled, disoriented, just as Izuku used the last of his momentum from Roche's gravity attack to drop and sweep her legs out from under her. He flowed over her falling body, using it as a springboard to launch himself sideways, out of Roche's gravitational field. He landed in a roll, coming up with a small, cylindrical device in his hand. He clicked it, and a grappling line shot out, embedding itself in the ceiling scaffolding. Rock, seeing his primary target escape, shifted his power, trying to increase the gravity around the grappling hook to snap the line. But Izuku was already swinging, not away, but directly towards Kale. The pyrokinetic's eyes widened in surprise as Izuku's boots slammed into his chest, sending him sprawling. Izuku landed silently, detached the line, and faced Rock, the last one standing. The big mutant was powerful but slow. His over-reliance on his quirk, his mutation, was his weakness. "Give up, Rock," Izuku said, his voice calm and even, barely winded. "Your power is strongest on a stable, horizontal plane. In 3 seconds I can have this entire floor magnetized, reversing the polarity. You'll be stuck to the ceiling. In 5 I can trigger the fire suppression system. Your friend Kale won't be much use then." Rosha's eyes darted around. He knew Izuku wasn't bluffing. He'd seen the schematics for this room in Izuku's notebooks. The boy knew this place better than the engineers who built it. With a frustrated roar, Rock lowered his hands. End simulation. Lorna's voice echoed through the chamber. Time, 1 minute, 47 seconds. Pathetic. Rock, he told you his plan. Kale, you telegraphed that attack from a mile away. Vela, try not to get your brain scrambled next time. She sighed dramatically. Go see the medics. Izuku, you're with me. Father wants to see you. Izuku gave a slight bow to his defeated opponents, a gesture of respect his tutors had drilled into him, before jogging towards the exit. He helped the groaning Vela to her feet. How did you know I'd blink there? She asked, rubbing her head. Your rhythm is predictable. Izuku answered, his analyst brain clicking back on. You always teleport to a target 6 o'clock position after a frontal assault. You need to incorporate verticality. He offered a small, clinical smile. We can work on it tomorrow, if you want. She just stared at him, a mixture of annoyance and awe on her face. As he walked away, he could feel Lorna's gaze on his back. He had won. He had proven his worth, again. It was the only thing that mattered. 10 years earlier, the boy who arrived on Genosha was a raw nerve. He was small, quiet, and flinched at loud noises. The island was a sensory overload. Mutants with skin of stone, wings of fire, and eyes that glowed in the dark walked the streets. The air itself seemed to crackle with untamed power. For the first few weeks, he barely spoke, clutching a worn All Might figure in his hand like a holy relic. His education began not in a classroom, but on a running track at dawn. His instructor was a man named Eric, a former Special Forces soldier whose mutation gave him the stamina of a machine. Eric did not care that Izuku was 4 or 5 or 6. He cared only about results. Again, Eric would grunt, his voice like gravel, as a small, panting Izuku collapsed at the end of a 5-kilometer run. I can't. The boy would weep. Can't is a luxury. Eric would reply unmoved. It is the excuse of the victim. Lord Magneto did not bring a victim to this island. He brought a student. Get up. And Izuku, his lungs burning and legs screaming, would always get up. That grueling physical regimen was the foundation. Parkour came next, teaching him to see the city not as a collection of buildings, but as a three-dimensional landscape of obstacles and opportunities. He learned to scale walls, to leap between rooftops, to move through an urban environment with the fluidity of water. Then came the martial arts, Krav Maga for brutal efficiency, Aikido for redirection of force, Judo for leverage. He was never going to be the strongest in a fight, so he was taught to be the smartest, to use an opponent's power and momentum against them, to end a conflict in the quickest, most decisive way possible. But the true transformation happened in a library. Eric, he had insisted Izuku call him Eric in private, father in his own heart, discovered the boy's notebooks a year after his arrival. They were filled with childish scrawls, but the content was astonishing. Detailed, surprisingly insightful analyses of the powers of every mutant Izuku had encountered on Genosha. He had sketched their appearances, hypothesized the biological mechanisms of their abilities, and listed potential strengths and weaknesses. It was the continuation of his hero analysis for the future, but the context had profoundly changed. Eric sat with him that evening in his vast, metallic study high atop the Genoshan citadel. He placed one of the notebooks on the polished desk between them. Explain this page to me, Eric said, pointing to a drawing of Lorna. Izuku, now 6, spoke with a nervous energy. Lorna-san's power is like yours, but different. It seems more chaotic? Less refined. She's better with focused, high-energy pulses than large-scale manipulation. Her weakness is that she relies on it too much. If you can get past her magnetic shields, she's not as trained in hand-to-hand, and she gets frustrated, which makes her control sloppy. Eric listened, his expression unreadable. When Izuku finished, he was silent for a long moment. He looked from the notebook to the small boy sitting opposite him. In that moment, he knew his gamble had been more successful than he could have ever imagined. He had brought the boy here to forge his will. He had not realized he was also bringing a strategic weapon of immense potential. You have a gift, Izuku, Eric said, his voice softer than usual. A power of observation and analysis that is more potent than any simple mutation. We will nurture it. From that day on, Izuku's education intensified. He was given access to Genosha's brightest minds. He studied physics to understand the forces he saw wielded every day. He learned engineering and circuitry, metallurgy and chemistry. He was taught to see the world not just as it was, but as a system of interlocking principles that could be understood, exploited, and controlled. His workshop became his sanctuary. It was a chaotic space filled with half-finished projects, blueprints, and the smell of ozone and solder. It was here he built his tools, the EMP emitters, the grappling lines, the hard light projectors, the multi-tool on his wrist that could analyze energy signatures and hack simple electronics. He worked alongside a young technopath named Synapse, whose ability to mentally interface with machines allowed them to build wonders. Izuku would design the theory, Synapse would streamline the execution. They were the architects of Genosha's next generation of support technology, all before they were 15, and all the while, he filled his notebooks. They became legendary among the acolytes. Mutant Power Quirk Analysis, Volume 14. Volume 15. To have a page dedicated to you in Izuku's logs was both an honor and a terrifying prospect, for it meant he knew how to defeat you as well as you knew yourself. Life among mutants was a constant lesson in perspective. Izuku was the anomaly, the only baseline human in the inner circle. In the early days, some of the more radical mutants had viewed him with suspicion, a pet project of their leader. But Izuku earned his place not with power, but with utility and empathy. He was the one who could design a containment suit for the boy whose skin secreted acid. He was the one who could create a visor to help the girl whose eyes projected uncontrollable laser beams. He was the one who would sit for hours with the new arrivals, the terrified children who had been cast out by their families, their powers having manifested in horrifying or destructive ways. He remembered one girl, a 7-year-old named Anya, who had been brought to Genosha after her telepathic abilities had driven her entire village mad. She was found huddled in a cage, her parents having locked her away, calling her a demon. Izuku found her in the medical bay, rocking back and forth, humming a tuneless, terrified song. He didn't say anything. He just sat on the floor, a few feet away, and began to methodically clean and reassemble one of his grappling launchers. He worked in silence for an hour. Finally she spoke. "Does he hate us?" she whispered. Izuku didn't look up from his work. "Who? Your father?" "Magneto. The humans say he hates them." Izuku tightened a final screw before answering. "He doesn't hate humans," he said quietly. "He hates what they do. He hates their fear. He hates their cruelty. He hates that they build cages for little girls they don't understand." He finally looked at her, his green eyes soft and serious. He built this place so there would be no more cages. He saw their pain, he heard their stories of persecution, and he catalogued them in his heart alongside his analyses. Eric's ideology was no longer an abstract concept to him. It was the terrified sobs of Anya. It was the scar tissue on the back of a boy who could talk to insects, who had been nearly burned alive by his neighbors. It was the defiant hope of an entire nation of outcasts. He was one of them, not by blood, but by choice and by purpose. Check. The single word echoed in the quiet of Eric's study. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the room, glinting off the metallic chess pieces on the board between them. Izuku, now 14, stared at the board, his brow furrowed in concentration. His king was cornered. These chess games were a ritual, a silent battleground where their philosophies clashed more fiercely than any physical spar. Eric played a relentless, aggressive game, sacrificing pawns and knights without hesitation to secure a dominant position. Izuku played a cautious, defensive game, building intricate networks of support, valuing every piece. "You value your pawns too much," Eric observed, swirling a glass of red wine. "Sometimes, for the greater good, sacrifices are necessary. Every piece has a role," Izuku countered, finally moving his rook to block the immediate threat. "Losing one weakens the entire structure. A victory that costs you half your army is no victory at all." "A flawed analogy," Eric said, capturing the rook with his queen. "An army can be replaced. The principle of victory, the security it brings, is permanent. You still think like them, Izuku. You still cling to their sentimental, self-defeating morality. I think about efficiency, Izuku argued, his eyes never leaving the board. Your methods, they create martyrs. They inspire fear, which breeds hatred, which leads to more conflict. It's an endless cycle, a war of attrition that we, as a minority, cannot win in the long run. And you believe we can win by appealing to their better nature? Eric's voice was laced with a weary, bitter irony. I have seen humanity's better nature. It is a myth they tell themselves while sharpening their knives. We will not win by asking for a seat at their table, Izuku. We will win by building our own table, and ensuring they can never, ever flip it over. Power does not concede without a demand. It never has, and it never will. Izuku fell silent. He looked at the board. His position was hopeless. He had been so focused on saving every piece that he had failed to see the larger trap Eric had been laying for 3 moves. He had lost the war by trying to win every battle. He sighed and tipped his king over in surrender. Eric gave a rare, thin smile. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of a teacher seeing his student grasp a difficult lesson. You have a good heart, my son. It is your greatest strength, and your most exploitable weakness. I have tempered your body and sharpened your mind. But your heart, that is a battle you must fight on your own. My duty is to ensure you are equipped for it. He stood and walked to the great panoramic window that overlooked the Genoshan capital. The lights of the city were beginning to twinkle on, a man-made constellation. I have taught you our history. You know of the camps, of the registry acts, of the sentinels. You know the price of weakness. But the world is changing. This proliferation of quirks, especially in your homeland, is a unique phenomenon. He turned, his silhouette a dark, powerful shape against the twilight sky. This hero society, it is a fascinating experiment. They have taken the superpowered, the thing humanity has always feared, and commodified it. They have turned it into a celebrity spectacle, controlled by the government, bound by rules and regulations. They have brilliantly managed to both celebrate power and neuter it at the same time. Izuku stood, walking to stand beside his mentor. He understood. This was more than just a chess game. A new lesson was beginning. All might, Izuku said. The symbol of peace. He is the linchpin. His overwhelming power and charisma provide the illusion of absolute security, which allows the system to function. He is the system's greatest strength, and its greatest weakness. Eric finished. A system built around one man is a fragile one. But I am not interested in him. Not yet. I am interested in the machine itself, the institution that creates these so-called heroes. His gaze sharpened, and he turned to look directly at Izuku. This was it. The culmination of 10 years of training. The purpose for which he had been forged. Yuehai, Eric said, the name sounding foreign and strange in his mouth. It is the premier hero academy in the world. The heart of their system. From it, they produce the soldiers who will uphold their discriminatory status quo. The ones who will one day be ordered to hunt us down. He placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, the same gesture he had used in the jet 10 years ago. But now, it was not the hand of a savior to a child, but of a general to his most trusted lieutenant. I have arranged a new identity for you. A backstory. You will return to Japan. You will take their entrance exam, and you will pass. Your quirkless status, once your curse, will now be your greatest camouflage. They will never suspect you. The mission was clear. Infiltrate. Learn. Analyze. You will be my eyes and ears inside their fortress. Eric commanded, his voice low and intense. You will learn the full extent of their capabilities. You will identify their strengths, their weaknesses. You will assess their next generation of heroes. And you will search for our kind, mutants living among them, hiding their true nature, who may be turned to our cause. He looked at Izuku, searching his face for any sign of hesitation. He found none. He found only the calm, analytical focus he himself had instilled in the boy. This will be dangerous, Eric warned. You will be alone, surrounded by the very people who would see us all in chains. You will have to live a lie. You will have to pretend to be one of them. Izuku's gaze was steady. For a decade, He had trained for a war he hoped would never come. For a decade, he had been a human living as a mutant. Now, he was being asked to be a mutant living as a human. It was the ultimate test. It was his purpose. "They will call me useless," Izuku said, a faint, cold echo of the boy he once was. "They will underestimate me. That will be their first mistake." A flicker of immense pride shone in Eric's eyes. He had taken a piece of discarded clay and molded it into something strong, sharp, and beautiful. He had taken a Deku and forged a king. "They called you useless," Eric said, his voice resonating with power and love. "Go back there. Go to the heart of their world. And show them what a boy with nothing but his will can truly do." Izuku nodded, a single, sharp gesture of acceptance. His childhood was over. His training was complete. The mission had begun. He would return to the land of his birth not as the crying, quirkless boy who had left it, but as Izuku, son of Magneto, an agent of Genosha, and a harbinger of a new genesis. The air in Muzidafa was thick with the ghosts of Izuku's past. It tasted of sweet crepes and exhaust fumes, a combination he hadn't experienced in a decade. The noise was a constant, chaotic symphony, the rumble of the elevated trains, the cacophony of 1,000 different conversations, the distant, heroic fanfare of a pro-hero apprehending a purse snatcher. To the boy raised in the structured, purposeful hum of Genosha, it was like stepping into a carnival that never ended. He stood on the balcony of the sterile, anonymous apartment Eric's contacts had secured for him. It was a concrete box in the sky, offering a panoramic view of the city he once called home. Billboards screamed at him, their colors garish and bright. A colossal image of All Might, fists raised in triumph, adorned a skyscraper. Adverts for Endeavor's hero agency flashed on digital screens, promising security through overwhelming firepower. It was a society that worshipped power, packaged it, and sold it back to the masses as entertainment. Eric's voice echoed in his memory, cool and precise as always. "Observe their culture. It is their greatest weakness. They have mistaken celebrity for strength, and spectacle for security. They build their gods out of flesh and blood and wonder why they crumble." Izuku turned from the window and walked to a simple steel table in the center of the room. Laid out on its surface with surgical precision was his gear. It wasn't a costume. It was a toolkit. There were the electromagnetic pulse discs, their casings a non-reflective matte black. There was the high-tension grappling line launcher, its housing reinforced with a lightweight carbon nanotube alloy. There were his gauntlets, the knuckles weighted for impact, the palms embedded with low-power magnetic field generators for manipulating small metallic objects or disrupting electronics at close range. Everything was his own design, refined over thousands of hours in his Genosha workshop. It was discreet, functional, and utterly lethal in its potential. For this mission, it would be his quirk. He picked up a small, silver sphere, no bigger than a marble. A sonic resonator. Benign to the ear, but capable of emitting a frequency that drove most automated targeting systems haywire. A tool of misdirection. A tool for the strategist, not the brawler. His gaze fell upon a framed photograph on his bedside table, the only personal item in the apartment. It was a picture taken 5 years ago. A 10-year-old Izuku stood between a smiling Lorna and a stern, unsmiling Eric. Eric's hand was on his shoulder, a gesture of ownership, of pride. Of fatherhood. The image was a constant reminder of his true home, his true family, his true purpose. He was not here to become a hero. He was here to deconstruct the very idea of one. With a final check of his equipment, concealed perfectly within the pockets and lining of his plain school uniform, he left the apartment. The UA entrance exam awaited. The campus of UA High was an architectural marvel, a monument to the hero age. Towers of glass and steel scraped the sky, connected by sweeping bridges. It was less a school and more a self-contained fortress city. Izuku's analytical gaze swept over it, noting the obvious and concealed security emplacements, the strategic choke points, the potential structural weaknesses. To the thousands of other applicants streaming through the massive gates, it was a dreamland. To Izuku, it was the objective. He moved through the crowd with an unobtrusive grace, a gray fish in a river of brightly colored, chattering hopefuls. He could feel the crackle of nervous energy, the palpable thrum of quirks barely held in check. A boy with engine calves zoomed past. A girl with pink skin and horns laughed with her friends. They were children, Izuku noted, giddy and terrified in equal measure. They saw this as the culmination of their lives. He saw it as the first step of his infiltration. His eyes, scanning constantly, landed on a familiar shock of spiky ash-blonde hair. Katsuki Bakugo. He swaggered with the same arrogant confidence he'd possessed at 4, magnified by a decade of praise and the power of his explosive quirk. Their paths were about to cross. Izuku felt a flicker of nothing. The terrified, weeping child who had once stood before Bakugo was a ghost, a different person from a different life. This boy was merely a data point, an obstacle to be analyzed and, if necessary, overcome. As if sensing his gaze, Bakugo's head snapped around, his crimson eyes narrowing. They scanned the crowd, passing right over Izuku without a glimmer of recognition. Why would they? The boy he remembered was a frail, quirkless crybaby. The young man before him was calm, composed, his posture radiating a quiet, dangerous competence. Izuku was invisible, and that was his greatest advantage. He found his assigned seat in the vast orientation auditorium and settled in. The pro-hero present mic burst onto the stage, his voice a deafening wave of enthusiasm. Izuku tuned out the performance, focusing only on the information. The written exam. The practical exam. 3 types of robots, worth 1, 2, or 3 points. A 4th, 0-point robot that was an obstacle. A blue-haired boy with glasses shot to his feet, chopping the air with his hand, questioning the handout and the 0-pointer. Tenya Ida? Quirk engine. Obvious application, high-speed movement, likely weakness, maneuverability in cluttered environments, stamina consumption. A rigid adherence to rules. Predictable. Izuku's mind was already running combat simulations. The rescue point system present Mike mentioned in passing was the key. Most of these applicants would focus on destruction. They would see a simple contest of power. Izuku saw the true test, a resource management problem combined with a threat assessment and crisis response drill. They wanted brawlers. They needed thinkers. The written portion was, as he'd expected, insultingly simple. Questions on ethics that were laughably black and white, physics problems he could have solved at age 10, and logical puzzles that lacked any real subtlety. He finished in half the allotted time, spending the remainder methodically reviewing his answers, ensuring the perfection Eric would demand. Then came the practical. The air in front of Gate B was thick with anticipation. Izuku stood near the back of the crowd, stretching his muscles with slow, deliberate movements. He ignored the stares and whispers. His file, meticulously crafted by Eric's people, listed him as quirkless. In this crowd of superpowered aspirants, he was a freak, a joke. Let them think it. What's a quirkless loser doing here? One boy with rock-like skin muttered to his friend. Probably wants to get a good view before he's crushed. The friend snickered. Izuku's expression didn't change. Their derision was just more data. It confirmed Eric's core thesis. This society was built on a foundation of genetic arrogance. The girl with the brown bob, the one he noticed earlier, was fidgeting nervously nearby, chanting this is it, to herself. Ochako Uraraka. Quirk, zero gravity. Application, neutralizing opponents or obstacles by removing their weight. Weakness, overuse causes nausea. Limited to objects she can physically touch. High potential for environmental manipulation, an asset if applied correctly, and start! Present Mick's voice boomed from unseen speakers. The crowd stood for a confused moment. What are you waiting for? The test has begun. There are no countdowns in a real fight. Chaos erupted. The mass of students surged forward into the sprawling cityscape of the mock battle center. Ida was gone in a blur of blue flame. Uraraka slapped a nearby wall and floated over the initial crush. Bakugo launched himself into the air with a series of controlled explosions, a manic grin on his face. Izuku did not run. He took a single step back, letting the tide of bodies flow past him. Then, with an efficiency of motion that was beautiful in its precision, he scaled the side of the building next to the gate. Using window ledges and drain pipes as handholds, he was on the roof in under 10 seconds, his decade of parkour training making the ascent trivial. From his vantage point, the battlefield was laid out before him like one of Eric's chessboards. He saw it all. The robots, emerging from alleyways on predictable patrol routes. The students, a chaotic swarm of quirks and panicked energy. Aoyama, the blonde boy in the cape, fired a naval laser that obliterated a one-pointer, but then clutched his stomach, his face pained. Power limitation confirmed. Bakugo was a whirlwind of destruction, blasting everything in sight, but his method was indiscriminate, causing as much collateral damage as effective scoring. Inefficient. Wastes energy. Creates unstable terrain. For a full minute, Izuku simply watched, his mind a supercomputer processing dozens of variables. He mapped the robot locations, tracked the movements of the most powerful students, and identified key structural features of the city block. He wasn't here to rack up the highest score. He was here to demonstrate a different kind of power. His plan formed, a multi-layered strategy of assists, environmental takedowns, and surgical strikes. It was time to go to work. He leaped from the rooftop, his body twisting in midair. He fired his grappling line, swinging through the concrete canyon in a silent, controlled arc. He passed over a cluster of 3 two-pointers that had cornered a student with a gigantification quirk. The student was powerful but slow, unable to fight effectively in the tight space. Izuku, still in mid-swing, dropped a sonic resonator into their midst. The robot's head swiveled, their optical sensors flashing red as the high-frequency sound scrambled their targeting. They began firing wildly, their laser blasts striking each other, causing a chain reaction of explosions. Izuku landed lightly on a fire escape 2 buildings down as the points for 3 assists were mentally tallied. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He moved through the city like a ghost. He saw Tenya Ida speeding down a main thoroughfare. Izuku, from an alleyway, threw a small, magnetized disc that stuck to a lamppost. Ida was too fast to see it. As the engine-legged boy approached, Izuku activated the disc, which emitted a sharp, focused sound identical to a robot's activation chime. Ida, conditioned by the rules, immediately changed course, rocketing down the alley to investigate. He found a 3-pointer waiting there and dispatched it with a powerful kick. Another assist for Izuku. He became a puppeteer, pulling the strings of the battlefield. He used his knowledge of his opponent's psychology, their predictable, heroic instincts, to his advantage. He lured robots into the paths of the powerhouse students, collecting a steady stream of assist points while conserving all of his energy and equipment. But assists weren't enough. He needed direct combat points to prove his viability. He rounded a corner and came face to face with the 2-pointer. Its single red eye glowed, and a Gatling gun on its arm began to spin. Izuku didn't hesitate. He sprinted forward, not away. The robot fired. Izuku slid, the laser blast searing the air where his head had been. He came up under the robot's arm, slapping one of his gauntlets against the machine's torso. A blue spark of magnetic energy flared. The robot's internal chronometer and power regulation systems shorted out. It froze, shuddered, and then collapsed, inert. A surgical strike. No explosion, no wasted energy. Just a clean, efficient neutralization. 24 points on the board. He repeated the process again and again. He was a phantom, appearing from the shadows, disabling his targets with unnerving precision, and vanishing before anyone else could even register his presence. He wasn't fighting like a hero. He was fighting like an assassin. In the observation room, a hushed silence had fallen. "Who is this kid?" a pro-hero muttered, pointing at a monitor focused on Izuku. "His file says he's quirkless." "He is," Principal Nisa said, his black eyes gleaming with intellectual fervor. He sipped his tea. "And he is currently in 3rd place. Utterly fascinating." All Might, in his skeletal form, leaned forward, his gaze locked on the screen. He had heard about a quirkless applicant, and had felt a pang of pity. But this was not a boy to be pitied, this was a boy to be feared. The cold, tactical brilliance on display was unlike anything he had ever seen from an aspiring hero. It was the mindset of a seasoned veteran, of a soldier deep behind enemy lines. Aizawa grunted from his corner. "He's the only one out there treating this like a real mission instead of a video game. He's thinking. It's logical." A rare, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. Suddenly, the ground trembled. A deep, groaning sound echoed through the city as a shadow fell over the entire block. The zero-pointer. It was immense, a titan of chrome and steel that towered over the tallest buildings. Its single red eye scanned the cityscape, and its massive arms, each the size of a bus, swatted at rooftops. The effect was instantaneous. The bravado of the applicants evaporated, replaced by primal fear. Everyone ran. The monster was an obstacle, not a target. Engaging it was pointless, suicidal. Izuku was already moving, not away, but parallel to the beast's path, keeping it in his line of sight as he leaped from rooftop to rooftop. He was analyzing it. The armor plating was too thick for any of his tools. The power source was too deep within its chassis. Direct confrontation was impossible. His objective was to observe and withdraw. Then he heard the cry. He looked down and saw her. The nice girl. Ochako Uraraka. She was trapped, her leg pinned beneath a large slab of concrete dislodged by the zero-pointer's emergence. She struggled, her face pale with pain and terror, as the colossal robot lumbered towards her, its every step shaking the very foundations of the world. Something inside Izuku shifted. The cold, detached analyst receded, and the boy who had stood in a park 10 years ago awoke. It was the same scene, retold with concrete and steel instead of fists and explosions. A person in need. A threat they could not face. An injustice. Eric's voice, from 1,000 lessons. Compassion is a weapon, Izuku. Do not mistake it for a weakness. But you must wield it with your mind, not just your heart. A heart that bleeds for everyone is a heart that can save no one. A mind that can triage, strategize, and act, that is the mind of a true protector. His mind ignited. The panic and chaos around him faded into a silent, slow-motion tableau. All that existed was the problem and its variables. Threat assessment, zero-pointer. Imminent danger to civilian Uraraka. Primary armor invulnerable to my equipment. Too massive to engage physically. Objective, rescue Uraraka. Neutralize immediate threat. Analysis. The robot's sheer mass is its greatest weapon and its greatest weakness. Its center of gravity is dangerously high. Its locomotion is dependent on massive, complex hydraulic and electrical systems in its joints. It cannot be destroyed. But it can be unbalanced. Conclusion: disable, don't destroy. Create an opportunity. The plan, elegant and insane, snapped into place. He didn't shout. He didn't scream. He acted. He launched his grappling line, not upwards, but across the street, embedding it in the shoulder of a building. He swung down, a pendulum of purpose, landing silently on the street 100 meters from the advancing robot. The other students were fleeing past him, a tide of terror. He was the only one moving toward the danger. He broke into a dead sprint, his years of conditioning pushing his body to its limits. He ran directly at the mechanical titan. Uraraka saw him, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What are you doing?" "Run!" Izuku didn't answer. His eyes were locked on his target, the massive, articulated ankle joint of the zero-pointer's right leg. It was the size of a small car, covered in thick plating. But there was a seam, a place where the hydraulic actuators had to be serviced. A maintenance panel, no larger than a manhole cover. He drew 2 of his custom-built EMP discs. These were different, designed with a shaped charge to focus the electromagnetic pulse in a single, devastating cone. As he ran, his mind was a whirlwind of calculations: the robot's stride, his own velocity, the wind resistance. 50 meters. 40. 30. The robot's colossal foot rose, preparing to take another step, a step that would bring it perilously close to Uraraka. The maintenance panel on its ankle was exposed for a fraction of a second. Now, with a flick of his wrist, Izuku threw the first disc. It sailed through the air, a black speck against the gray steel, and slapped onto the panel with a magnetic thunk. A heartbeat later, he threw the second, aiming for the same spot. He didn't wait to see it land. He planted his feet, skidding to a halt, and slammed his hand onto his wrist controller. A blinding blue-white light erupted from the robot's ankle. There was no sound, but the effect was catastrophic. Every system in the leg's complex joint short-circuited simultaneously. Hydraulic fluid vented in superheated clouds of steam. The leg seized, locking at a 30-degree angle. The robot, its forward momentum unchecked, stumbled. The 80-ton machine teetered, its balance completely gone. Izuku's mind was already 3 steps ahead. Limb lock initiated. He muttered under his breath, his voice a low, intense hum. Mass, approximately 80 tons. Angle of repose, 15 degrees. Structural integrity failing. Fall trajectory calculated. The robot began to topple, not forward but sideways, away from Uraraka, just as he had predicted. He fired his second grappling line. The hook latched onto the edge of the concrete slab pinning the girl's leg. Izuku dug his heels into the asphalt, his muscles screaming as he prepared to take the strain. Uraraka! He yelled, his voice sharp and commanding. On my mark, release your quirk on the rubble. 3, 2, 1. Now! She slapped her hand on the concrete, and for a moment, the immense weight vanished. In that same instant, Izuku threw his entire body back, pulling on the line with a desperate, explosive heave. The now weightless slab slid just enough. Uraraka scrambled free, her leg bloody but intact, a second before the zero-pointer crashed to the ground with a sound like the end of the world. The shockwave kicked up a tidal wave of dust and debris. The robot's massive head landed precisely where she had been trapped. Silence. The dust began to settle. The other students, who had been watching from a safe distance, stared in stunned, absolute disbelief. In the center of the devastation stood a single, quirkless boy, breathing heavily, his uniform torn, but his posture unbroken. He hadn't destroyed the obstacle. He had analyzed it, disabled it, and used its own weight against it to save someone's life. The final buzzer blared, its sound tinny and anticlimactic in the sudden, profound quiet. Izuku's shoulders slumped, the adrenaline finally leaving him. He walked over to the shell-shocked Uraraka. He didn't offer a comforting word or a hero's smile. He crouched, his eyes clinically scanning her injured leg. No signs of compound fracture, he stated, his voice returning to its normal, analytical calm. Ankle is sprained, possibly a hairline fracture in the fibula. Do not put weight on it. Medical assistance is on its way. He stood up, gave one last look at the twitching, disabled behemoth, and then walked away without another word, already resetting his gauntlets and taking a mental inventory of his expended equipment. The mission was complete. The point had been made. In the darkened observation room, no one spoke for a full minute. Then, Principal Nisa set his teacup down with a soft click and began to clap, a slow, deliberate sound that echoed in the silence. All Might stared at the screen, at the image of the solitary green-haired boy walking away from the carnage. He had just witnessed an act of impossible heroism, executed with the cold, brutal efficiency of a master tactician. This boy didn't have one for all. He didn't have any quirk at all. And yet, what kind of power, All Might thought, a shiver running down his spine, is that? The envelope was deceptively thin. It arrived in a plain, unassuming packet, bearing the golden seal of Yue Hai. Izuku held it in his hand, feeling its negligible weight. For the thousands of other applicants across Japan, this flimsy piece of paper held the validation of their dreams, the culmination of a lifetime of wanting. For Izuku, it was merely confirmation of a successful mission phase. There was no nervous tremor in his hands, no frantic beat in his chest. He had run the calculations. He had executed the plan. This was the only logical outcome. He slid it open with a practiced, efficient thumb. A small metal disc fell onto the table with a soft clink. A holographic projector. A moment later, a beam of light shot upwards, coalescing into the towering, skeletal form of Toshinori Yagi, All Might. I am here! A projection! The hero boomed, though his voice lacked its usual Gutterdammering force. Izuku remained standing, his arms crossed, his expression neutral. He was not a fanboy awaiting a verdict from his idol. He was an intelligence operative receiving a debrief. All Might, or rather his recording, cleared his throat. Young man, your file lists you as Midoriya Izuku. Quirk none. I must admit, when I saw that file, I did not expect much. A testament to my own failings as an educator, it seems. The hologram flickered, showing footage from the exam. It showed Izuku on the rooftop, observing. It showed him orchestrating takedowns, using other students as unwitting instruments of his will. Then, it focused on the zero-pointer. Your written exam was perfect. All Might's voice continued, a new note of awe creeping in. You scored a respectable 24 villain points through precise, non-destructive neutralization, an impressive feat in itself. But that is not why we are here. The hologram zoomed in on the final confrontation. It showed Izuku's mad dash towards the Titan, the calculated throw of the EMP discs, the disabled leg, the toppling giant, and the last-second rescue of Ochako Uraraka. The practical exam was not just a test of power, young Midoriya. It was a test of spirit. Of heroism. While others fled, you analyzed. While others panicked, you acted. You saved another applicant from certain doom, demonstrating courage and tactical brilliance far beyond your years. For that, the judges have awarded you 60, that's 60, rescue points. A scoreboard materialized in the air. Izuku's name shot up the rankings, landing him in first place, above even Katsuki Bakugo. Your score of 84 points is the highest in this year's exam. All Might declared. You have proven unequivocally that a quirk is not what makes a hero. A title is earned by actions, not by birthright. So come, young Midoriya. This is your hero academia. The projection faded, leaving Izuku alone in the silence of his apartment. First place. It was unexpected. His goal had been simply to pass, to secure a position in the hero course for his infiltration. Achieving the top score would draw unwanted attention. A flaw in his calculations. He had underestimated the value the system placed on reckless, albeit successful, acts of self-sacrifice. He logged the data point mentally. Hero society has a systemic and exploitable bias towards dramatic, high-visibility rescues. He glanced at the photograph of his family. Eric's stern face seemed to stare back at him. Do not seek the spotlight. His father's voice echoed in his memory. True power operates from the shadows, not the stage. This was a complication. But every complication was also an opportunity. He would adapt. He always did. The news of Izuku's success rippled through the small orbit of his former life like a shockwave. Katsuki Bakugo received his own acceptance letter, his impressive score of 77 villain points securing him second place. It should have been a moment of supreme triumph. Instead, it was a declaration of war. He stormed through his house, a thundercloud of rage, the letter crumpled in his fist. Second place. He was second place. To whom? He scanned the list again, his eyes finding the name at the top. Midoriya Izuku. The name didn't register at first. It was a phantom, a ghost from a past he had crushed under his boot. Then, the face from the exam orientation, the quiet, green-haired boy with the dead eyes, flashed in his mind. It couldn't be. Deku? He whispered, the name a venomous hiss. It was impossible. A lie. A clerical error. The quirkless, useless, pathetic pebble he had spent his childhood kicking out of his path could not have possibly beaten him. It defied the fundamental laws of his universe. The strong rule. The weak submit. He had the perfect quirk. He was strong. Deku was a bug. Quirkless. Weak. The logic of his world fractured, collapsing into a singularity of pure, unadulterated rage. He didn't just feel angry, he felt cheated. He felt as though the universe itself had personally insulted him. He had to find him. He had to see it, hear it from the useless bastard's own mouth. He had to understand how his world had been so thoroughly, so completely, turned upside down. 2 days later, Izuku was walking home from a local library, his backpack filled with technical manuals and municipal blueprints, when a familiar, explosive crackle echoed from a nearby underpass. He paused, his head tilting slightly. He recognized the sound, the signature of Bakugo's quirk. His mission parameters did not include engaging with former contacts, but this was an uncontrolled variable. He altered his course, approaching the underpass with the quiet tread of a scout. The scene was one of contained chaos. The amorphous, sludgy body of a villain had engulfed a struggling figure. It was Bakugo. His hands were firing off explosions erratically within the viscous green mass, but they were doing more harm than good. setting fire to the surrounding debris and preventing the assembled pro-heroes from getting close. Izuku's eyes did a rapid, clinical scan of the situation. The pros, Death Arms, Kamui Woods, Backdraft, were all present. But they were ineffective. Death Arms lacked the power to break the villain's fluid body. Kamui Woods' wood-based quirk was useless against a liquid enemy and in the face of Bakugo's explosions. Backdraft was focused entirely on containment, trying to keep the fires from spreading. They were specialists, each unable to act outside their prescribed function. A critical flaw in hero team composition. He saw All Might standing in the crowd, a gaunt, skeletal figure clutching his side. Izuku's eyes narrowed. He recognized him instantly from the Yui projection. The symbol of peace was here, but he wasn't acting. Izuku's mind processed the visual data, the pained expression, the protective posture over his left side, the steam faintly rising from his body. Severe physical injury, Izuku diagnosed. Time-limited power transformation. He's reached his limit for the day. The situation was deteriorating. Bakugo's struggles were weakening, his frantic explosions becoming smaller, more desperate. He was suffocating. The heroes were paralyzed by protocol and mismatched abilities. The crowd was a sea of gawking onlookers, their phones held up to record the potential death of a child. Izuku felt a cold, familiar anger rise within him. It was the same anger he'd felt in the park as a child, the same feeling that had propelled him towards the zero-pointer. It was the righteous fury at the sight of incompetence in the face of crisis. At the sight of the strong failing to protect the weak. Eric's teachings warred with his instincts. Do not reveal your capabilities unnecessarily. Anonymity is your shield. But another lesson surfaced, one taught not with words but by example. When the system fails, a true leader acts. This was a system failure. He didn't run. He didn't scream. He simply moved. Slipping through the crowd, he vaulted the police barricade before anyone could react. Hey! Kid! Get back here! Death Arms shouted. Izuku ignored him. His mind was a cold, clear stream of tactical thought. Target, sludge villain. Composition, semi-liquid viscous. Weakness, centralized mass containing eyes and mouth, likely the core consciousness. Hostage, Bakugo, Katsuki. Threat, suffocation. Explosive quirk is a liability and a potential asset. He slid his backpack off his shoulders as he ran. He unzipped a side pocket and pulled out a single, dense sphere. A smoke pellet, military grade. What is he doing? A hero yelled. Izuku didn't answer. He was within 20 feet now. The villain's large, maniacal eyes swiveled to focus on him. Another one? Stay out of this! It gurgled. With a flick of his wrist, Izuku threw the pellet. It landed at the villain's base and erupted in a thick, choking cloud of gray smoke, instantly obscuring the entire scene from the heroes and the crowd. I can't see! Damn it, what did he do? Under the cover of smoke, Izuku acted. The villain, its vision obscured, was momentarily disoriented. Bakugo seized the chance, letting off another powerful blast, trying to push the sludge away from his face. The explosion illuminated the smoke from within, giving Izuku a perfect, strobe-lit view of the villain's core. He saw a piece of rusted rebar on the ground, dislodged from the concrete wall. He scooped it up. It was heavy, unbalanced, a crude weapon. It would have to do. He lunged forward into the smoke. The villain sensed his movement, and lashed out with a slimy tendril. Izuku dropped, sliding on the grimy concrete, the tendril whipping over his head. He came up right in front of the monster's core. For a split second, two pairs of eyes met through the swirling gray. The villain's, wide with surprise and rage. And Izuku's, cold, green, and utterly devoid of fear. He didn't aim a killing blow. His mission was not to defeat, but to rescue. He drove the point of the rebar into the villain's large, gelatinous eye. It wasn't a physical wound, but the shock to the creature's nervous system was immense. It shrieked, a horrible, wet sound, and its body convulsed, its grip on Bakugo momentarily loosening. It was the opening. It was all Izuku needed. Bakugo! Izuku's voice was a sharp, commanding bark. Breathe! Now! The command, the sudden appearance of the boy he tormented his whole life, shocked Bakugo out of his panic state. He gasped, sucking in a precious lungful of smoky air. That single breath was enough to reignite his spirit. With a primal roar, he unleashed the most powerful, focused explosion he could muster, blasting the sludge away from his body. The smoke was cleared by the shockwave. When vision returned, the crowd saw Bakugo on his hands and knees, gasping for air, and the sludge villain, recoiling and shrieking, a significant portion of its mass blasted away. And standing between them was Izuku, his school uniform singed, holding a piece of rebar like a soldier's spear. Before the villain could recover, a blur of motion shot past Izuku. Texas! Smash! All Might, his body suddenly buffed to its heroic proportions, threw a single, monumental punch. The air pressure alone was enough to obliterate the sludge villain, splattering it across the underpass walls. The force of the blow changed the weather, dark clouds gathering and releasing a sudden downpour. The fight was over. The aftermath was a storm of noise and confusion. The heroes, embarrassed and flustered, surrounded Izuku, alternately scolding him for his recklessness and praising his bravery. Bakugo was tended to by paramedics, his furious, confused gaze never leaving Izuku. He hadn't been saved. He had been rescued by Deku. The humiliation was a physical burn. Izuku, for his part, was a mask of calm. He answered the hero's questions with short, non-committal answers, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw All Might, mobbed by reporters, giving his trademark smile, but their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and Izuku saw something in the hero's gaze beyond the public persona. He saw questions. He saw a profound, unsettling curiosity. He slipped away before they could get his name, melting back into the crowd, his mission to observe having escalated into an unplanned field operation. It was a messy, public display. Another complication. But as he walked away, the rain washing the grime from his face, he knew one thing for certain. The symbol of peace had seen him. And he had not seen a reckless child. He had seen a solution. The summons came later that day. Izuku was charting the city's sewer system when a gust of wind rattled his balcony door. Standing there, impossibly, was All Might, his smile looking strained and tired. "Young man," he said, his voice a low rumble. "We need to talk." They stood on the roof of the apartment building, the setting sun painting the city in hues of orange and purple. All Might had deflated back into his skeletal form, steam hissing from his body. He explained everything. The injury he'd sustained 5 years ago in a battle with a villain named All for One. The catastrophic damage to his respiratory system. The time limit on his power. Izuku listened with the intensity of a strategist receiving critical enemy intelligence. He didn't gasp. He didn't cry. His mind was cataloging, analyzing. The nation's central pillar of stability is structurally compromised. The symbol of peace is a dying concept, embodied by a dying man. The potential geopolitical ramifications were staggering. At the exam, All Might said, his voice heavy, "I saw a boy with a brilliant tactical mind. A boy who valued the lives of others over a high score. Then, today, I saw that same boy, with no power to his name, rush into a situation that had stumped pro-heroes. You didn't hesitate. You didn't panic. You acted. Tell me, young man. Why?" Izuku met his gaze. He could not tell him the truth. He could not speak of Genosha, of Eric, of the failures of a system he was here to dismantle. So he gave him a piece of the truth, wrapped in the ideology he was supposed to emulate. "Because it was the logical thing to do," Izuku said, his voice flat. "The available assets, the heroes, were not being deployed effectively due to tactical paralysis. A civilian was in mortal danger. The probability of a successful rescue via my intervention was higher than the probability of a successful rescue without it. So I acted." All Might stared at him, taken aback. It was the answer of a soldier, not a hero. It wasn't about saving him? About doing the right thing? Saving him was the right thing, Izuku corrected. My motivations were simply rooted in a practical assessment of the situation. To stand by and watch a preventable death is illogical. This boy was an enigma. He had the heart of the greatest hero, but it was filtered through the mind of a machine. And yet All Might knew, in his gut, in the core of the smoldering ember of One for All, he knew this was the one. This strange, cold, brilliant, heroic boy was his successor. "I have been searching for someone to inherit my power," All Might said, the words hanging heavy in the evening air. He lifted a hand, and a faint, fiery energy crackled around it. "My quirk is called One for All. It is a sacred torch, passed down from one generation to the next. It is the crystallization of power, a quirk that stockpiles strength. And I want to give it to you." Izuku's world didn't stop. His mind accelerated. One for All. A transferable, power stockpiling quirk. Exponentially increases physical abilities. The source of All Might's superpower. The ultimate asset. He was being handed the master key to the kingdom he was meant to infiltrate. It was a weapon beyond anything Genosha could have conceived. A power that could level cities, topple governments. A power that could protect his people, all of his people, forever. But it came with a price. The legacy. The ideology. The burden of being the next symbol of peace, a concept he and Eric found fundamentally flawed. "Why me?" Izuku asked, his voice betraying no emotion. "You could choose any of the top pro heroes. Mirio Togata at UA has a powerful quirk, and by all accounts, the ideal heroic personality. They are already great heroes," All Might countered. "But you are a hero without a quirk. You have the instincts, the courage, the will, everything but the power. One for All is not just about strength, it is about the spirit of self-sacrifice. And you, young Midoriya, have that spirit in spades. You are the perfect vessel." Izuku turned away, looking out at the sprawling city lights. He weighed the variables. To accept was to tie himself to the very system he opposed. He would be All Might's pawn, the next smiling doll on the world stage. But to refuse? To refuse was to leave the single greatest weapon on the planet in the hands of his ideological enemy. To refuse was to betray his own mission objective, acquire assets, and neutralize threats. This was the ultimate asset. He could accept the power, but not the ideology. He could wield the sword without swearing fealty to the king. He could take this human power and use it for a mutant purpose. He could become the symbol of peace and redefine what that peace meant. A peace not of complacency, but of true, unassailable strength. A peace for all, including those who had been cast out. He turned back to face the gaunt hero. All Might looked desperate, hopeful, a dying king searching for an heir to his crumbling throne. "I accept," Izuku said. The relief on All Might's face was profound. "Excellent! Then, to seal the deal," he plucked a strand of his blonde hair. "You must eat this." Izuku looked at the hair, then back at All Might's beaming face. A flicker of disgust crossed his features, quickly suppressed. He took the hair with 2 fingers, his movements precise, clinical. He placed it in his mouth and swallowed. It was a necessary, if undignified, step in the acquisition of a strategic weapon. That night, Izuku sat in his darkened apartment. The only light came from the screen of a highly encrypted satellite laptop, a direct link to Genosha. The connection was established, the signal bouncing through half a dozen dead-end servers before reaching its destination. Eric's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired, but his gray eyes were as sharp as ever. "Izuku. Report." Izuku recounted the events of the past week with concise, factual clarity. The exam. First place. The encounter with Bakugo. The sludge villain. The intervention of All Might. He left out no detail. Finally, he came to the most critical part of his report. "All Might's power, One for All, is a transferable, stockpiling quirk," he stated. "He is injured and seeking a successor. He has chosen me." He paused, letting the weight of the words settle. "I have accepted the transfer. The asset is now in my possession." He braced himself for the reaction. For anger. For accusations of betrayal, of being co-opted by the enemy. Instead, Eric Lencher was silent for a very long time. A slow, dangerous smile spread across his face. It was not a smile of warmth, but of a chess master who has just seen his opponent make a fatal, game-ending blunder. "Well done," Magneto said, his voice a low, predatory purr. "You have exceeded all of my expectations. They have just handed their sharpest sword to the son of their greatest enemy. They seek to make you a symbol, a puppet for their broken world. They have no idea what they have truly done. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes blazing with a terrible, triumphant light. A human's power, wielded by a mutant's heart. You will take their hope, Izuku. You will take their strength. And you will use it to build our world. Use it to show them the folly of their system, my son. Show them all. The transmission ended. Izuku sat back, the laptop's screen going dark. For the first time, he felt it. A strange, unfamiliar warmth spreading through his limbs. A low thrum of barely contained energy, like a nuclear reactor coming online in his very cells. It felt alien. It felt vast. It felt powerful. It was the power of his enemy. It was the hope of his people. It was the quirk of a quirkless boy, and in his hands, it would not be a tool for peace. It would be a tool for revolution. The first day at UA High felt less like the start of a new chapter, and more like crossing into hostile territory under a flag of truce. Izuku walked the hallowed halls, his footsteps silent and measured on the polished floors. He wore the immaculate gray uniform, the red tie a stark slash of color against the drab fabric. To any observer, he was just another student, perhaps a bit more serious than most. But beneath the surface, a war was being waged. His body was a battleground. One for All was not a gentle addition, it was a hostile takeover. The power thrummed under his skin, a caged supernova begging for release. It felt like every cell in his body had been infused with lightning. A casual flex of his hand sent a tremor up his arm. A deep breath felt like it could crack his ribs. All Might had warned him it would take time for his body to adapt, comparing it to a bottle trying to contain the ocean. Izuku's private assessment was more clinical. He was a living bomb, and his own nervous system was a faulty detonator. This new, volatile variable required a complete revision of his combat style. His movements, once fluid and efficient, now had to be deliberate and restrained. He walked as if on eggshells, each step a conscious effort to not crack the pavement beneath his feet. The decade of muscle memory he had so painstakingly built was now a liability. He found the classroom, 1A, its door comically oversized. For accommodating a variety of physical quirks, his mind supplied automatically. He slid the door open and stepped inside. The room was already buzzing with the nervous energy of 20 teenagers on the cusp of their dreams. His entrance caused a momentary lull. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Hey, that's him. The quirkless kid who got first place. No way. How did he do that? Maybe he lied on his application. He ignored them, his gaze sweeping the room, cataloging his new classmates. The mission had now entered its second phase, asset evaluation. Tenya Ida, the blue-haired boy from the exam, was already seated, his posture ramrod straight. Ochako Uraraka, the girl he had rescued, was chatting animatedly with a pink-skinned girl with small horns, Mina Ashido. A boy with a bird's head, Fumikage Tokoemi, sat brooding by the window. Shoto Todoroki, the son of the number 2 hero, Endeavor, occupied a corner seat, radiating an aura of icy disinterest. Each one was a data point, a collection of strengths and weaknesses to be analyzed. Then his eyes met a pair of furious, crimson ones. Katsuki Bakugo was leaning back in his chair, his feet propped on the desk in a clear display of dominance. The look on his face was not one of simple anger. It was a complex storm of disbelief, fury, and something akin to betrayal. Izuku offered no reaction, his face a calm, neutral mask. He simply broke eye contact and moved to an empty seat in the back row, the same one he'd instinctively chosen in his old life. Some things, it seemed, were hardwired. He had barely settled in when a voice cut through the chatter. If you're here to make friends, you can pack up your things now. The voice came from a yellow sleeping bag lying on the floor behind the teacher's podium. A figure slowly unzipped it and rose, looking like a man who had just crawled out of a week-long hibernation. He had black, unkempt hair, tired eyes, and a capture weapon that looked like a mess of bandages wrapped around his neck. It took you all 8 seconds to quiet down, Shota Aizawa said, his voice a monotonous drawl. That's not going to work. Time is a precious resource. He tossed a set of blue gym uniforms onto his desk. Put these on and meet me on the field. The pea grounds baked under the mid-morning sun. The 20 students of Class 1A stood in a ragged line, a mixture of confusion and anticipation on their faces. A quirk assessment test? Uraraka questioned. But what about the entrance ceremony? Or orientation? There's no time for pointless pleasantries, Aizawa said, his tired eyes scanning the students, lingering for a fraction of a second longer on Izuku. You're here to become heroes. You don't have 3 years to waste on school festivals. UA is known for its freestyle educational system. That applies to the teachers as well. He turned to Bakugo. Bakugo. You got the second highest score on the practical exam. What was your farthest softball throw in middle school? 67 meters. Bakugo grunted. Try it with your quirk. Bakugo strode into the chalk circle, a savage grin spreading across his face. He took the ball, wound up, and unleashed a massive explosion as he threw. Die! He roared. The ball rocketed into the sky, a comet trailing smoke and fury. Aizawa held up a small device. 705.2 meters. The class erupted in excited murmurs. We can use our quirks. This is gonna be fun. Aizawa's expression soured. Fun? He repeated, his voice dangerously low. A shadow seemed to fall over his face. You think this is a game? For the next 3 years, you will be pushed to your absolute limits. Pain, exhaustion, the risk of death. That is the reality of being a hero. Fun is a luxury you can no longer afford. His eyes, now glowing with a faint red light, swept across them all. So, let's make this interesting. The student who ranks last in these 8 tests will be judged to have no potential, and will be expelled immediately. Panic. It spread through the class like a virus. Expelled? On the first day? This wasn't a test, it was a culling. Izuku, however, felt a sliver of something that resembled respect. It was a logical, if brutal, method of trimming the fat. In the Brotherhood, weakness wasn't just discouraged. It was a liability that could get everyone killed. This man, Aizawa, understood that. The first test, a 50-meter dash. Izuku watched as Ida used his engines to clear it in just over 3 seconds. Azuitsuyu, the frog-like girl, used her powerful legs. Uraraka made her clothes and shoes weightless. He was paired with Bakugo. As they took their places, Bakugo leaned in close, his voice a low, threatening growl. I don't know what kind of trick you pulled at the exam, Deku, but I'm going to smoke you. You're still just a bug. Izuku didn't look at him. His focus was on the finish line, and more importantly, on the volatile power coiling in his legs. All Might's voice in his head. Clench your buttocks and scream smash from the bottom of your heart. It was absurd, unhelpful advice. This wasn't about screaming, it was about control. He couldn't use 100%. His leg would explode. He couldn't use 0%. He'd be left in the dust. He needed to find a middle ground, a way to channel a fraction of a percentage of the storm. The starting pistol fired. Bakugo launched himself forward with a series of controlled blasts. Izuku pushed off, focusing all his concentration on his right calf. He tried to draw just 1% of one for all, to release it in a single, controlled burst of speed. The result was a catastrophic failure. Instead of a smooth release, the power snagged, then detonated. A sickening crack echoed in his leg as the bone fractured under the strain, and a geyser of concussive force erupted from his foot, blasting a crater in the track. He stumbled, collapsing to the ground, his legs screaming in agony. He finished the race in a pathetic 7.02 seconds, limping over the line as Bakugo glared back at him with a mixture of triumph and confusion. Pain was an old friend. He'd felt worse in Eric's training sessions. He gritted his teeth, forcing the leg to bear his weight. He could feel the power of one for all already at work, a tingling heat as his cells frantically tried to knit the bone back together. It was an accelerated, agonizing healing process. Next was the grip strength test. He tried again, channeling the power into his hand. Again, the control slipped. He felt the bones in his fingers grind together, as the machine registered an impossible number before shattering in his grip. More pain. More failure. He was coming in last in every event. The long jump, the sidesteps, he was forced to rely on his baseline physical conditioning, which, while impressive for a normal human, was mediocre in this superpowered company. The other students were starting to whisper again. The quirkless kid wasn't so impressive without his tricks. He was just a liability. Aizawa watched him, his expression unreadable behind his capture weapon. He saw the boy's frustration, the grim set of his jaw, the way he analyzed his own failures with a cold, detached fury. He wasn't panicking. He was troubleshooting. Finally it came to the last test, the ball throw. Izuku stepped into the circle, the soft ball feeling heavy in his hand. This was his last chance. If he used 100% in his arm, he could get an incredible score, but he'd shatter the limb completely, rendering him useless for the rest of the day, and for the rest of his mission, if he were expelled. If he used his base strength, he'd score around 60 meters. Dead last. Expulsion. Mission failure. The logic was inescapable. He had to use the power. He had to break his arm. It was a necessary sacrifice. He took a deep breath, the raw energy of one for all beginning to surge up his arm, red lightning-like veins appearing on his skin. He reared back, ready to unleash the full, terrible might of his new quirk. Hold it! Suddenly, the power vanished. The lightning faded. His arm felt normal again. He turned startled. Aizawa was standing right behind him, his black hair floating around his head, his eyes glowing a menacing red. The capture weapon was writhing like a nest of snakes. I erased your quirk, Aizawa said, his voice flat. That entrance exam was certainly not rational. A person like you, who would cripple himself for a single display of power, has no future as a hero. Izuku stared at him. Aizawa's quirk, erasure, was a fascinating and dangerous ability. But his analysis was flawed. He was misinterpreting the data. You're wrong, Izuku said, his voice quiet but firm. Aizawa's eyes narrowed. What did you say? You think this is a reckless bid for glory? Izuku explained, his strategist's mind taking over. You see it as self-destruction. That is a misreading of the situation. From my perspective, it is a calculated risk. A single, controlled injury in exchange for mission success, passing this test, is an acceptable trade-off. It is not irrational. It is triage. Aizawa was taken aback. No student had ever spoken to him like this, had ever debated his logic with such cold, dispassionate precision. You intend to be a burden on others after you've incapacitated yourself? That's not heroic. And failing the mission at the first hurdle is? Izuku countered. A hero who is afraid to get hurt, a soldier who is afraid to sacrifice, is a liability. I have assessed the variables. Breaking my arm is the most logical path to the desired outcome. For a long moment, Aizawa just stared at him, the red glow in his eyes fading as he blinked. He saw the unyielding certainty in the boy's gaze. It wasn't arrogance. It was the absolute conviction of a commander who has chosen the least terrible option on a battlefield of bad choices. A small, grim smile touched Aizawa's lips. Fine, he said, stepping back. Show me. Show me your logical path. The power of one for all flooded back into Izuku's body. He turned back to the field, the ball in his hand. Aizawa's words echoed in his head. Cripple himself for a single display. He was right. Destroying his arm was inefficient. It was the brute force solution. It was Bakugo's way. It was not Eric's way. Control Izuku. His father's voice, a memory from 1,000 training sessions. Power is a wild river. The fool tries to dam it. The master digs a new channel. A new channel. Not the whole arm. Not the entire river. Just a single, focus point. The tip of his finger. He reared back again, the power surging. But this time, he didn't let it flood his entire limb. He visualized it, forcing the cataclysmic energy down his arm, past his elbow, through his wrist, compressing that oceanic force into the single, tiny fulcrum of his right index finger. The pain was immense, a white-hot lance of agony. But it was contained. He threw the ball. As it left his hand, he released the power. Smash! The word was not a scream of effort, but a quiet, focused command. The air cracked. A sonic boom erupted from his fingertip, a visible shockwave that propelled the ball forward with unimaginable force. The wind pressure alone kicked up a tornado of dust that blasted outwards from the circle, forcing the other students to shield their eyes. The ball tore a hole in the sky, disappearing into a tiny speck before gravity finally reclaimed it. Izuku stood his ground, his arm intact save for his index finger, which was now a grotesque shade of purple, broken and swollen. Pain radiated up his arm, but it was a manageable, localized agony. A successful trade. Aizawa held up the device. The number settled. 705.3 meters. A tenth of a meter farther than Bakugo. A murmur of shock rippled through the class. He hadn't just passed. He had beaten the top student. Izuku turned to face his teacher, his face pale with pain but his eyes clear and steady. "Is that rational enough for you?" he asked. Aizawa stared at him, then at the shattered finger, then back at the impossible score. He couldn't help it. A wide, manic grin stretched across his face. "This kid," he breathed. "This kid is interesting." Bakugo watched the entire exchange with a sense of vertigo, as if the world were tilting on its axis. He had seen the power. Raw, untamed, incredible power. The kind of power that rivaled All Might's. And it had come from Deku. It was impossible. A quirk like that doesn't just appear. People don't manifest powers at 15. He had been lied to. Tricked. For his entire life, the boy he had defined himself against, the whetstone upon which he had sharpened his own superiority, had been hiding this from him. The rest of the assessment was a blur. After the ball throw, Izuku limped his way through the final events, his performance mediocre but enough to keep him out of last place. The fear of expulsion had been a logical deception on Aizawa's part to draw out their full potential. The final results were posted. Izuku ranked 15th. Not great, but not last. He had passed. As the class was dismissed, Bakugo cornered him, his hands sparking, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "Deku!" he snarled, grabbing Izuku by the front of his gym uniform. "What the hell was that? You've been hiding that quirk from me all this time, haven't you? You've been laughing at me behind my back, looking down on me your whole damn life." Izuku looked at Bakugo's furious face, at the desperation churning beneath the anger. He felt no fear. He felt a sliver of pity. Bakugo's entire worldview was predicated on his own innate superiority. Izuku's existence was a threat to his very identity. His response was not that of a scared child. It was the calm, cutting analysis of a Genoshan strategist. "No, I haven't," Izuku said, his voice level. He made no move to break Bakugo's grip. "This power is new. And you are mistaken. I have never once looked down on you, Kaken." Bakugo's eyes widened at the use of the old nickname. "I have studied you," Izuku continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I have analyzed you. Your quirk is powerful, versatile, with immense destructive potential. But that is all you have. You were always so focused on the power you were born with, the gift you did nothing to earn, that you never bothered to cultivate any other strength. Your tactics are rudimentary. Your temper is a liability. Your arrogance is a glaring, exploitable weakness. You can't understand how I got here because you only see the world through the lens of power. That isn't me looking down on you. That is me seeing you for exactly what you are." Each word was a scalpel, expertly dissecting Bakugo's ego. He let go of Izuku's uniform as if he'd been burned, his face a mixture of shock and utter fury. He was speechless. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Deku, the worthless, quirkless Deku, had just stripped him bare with nothing but words. "Stay out of my way," Bakugo finally hissed, his voice trembling with a rage so profound it had no outlet. He turned and stormed away, his shoulders rigid. Izuku watched him go. Phase 2 of the mission was proving to be more complex than anticipated. He had not only a class of assets to evaluate, but a pre-existing personal conflict that was now a dangerously unstable element. He glanced down at his broken finger, then flexed his other 19 classmates in his mind. He was an anomaly here, an outsider in every sense of the word. He was surrounded by children playing at being heroes, taught by a man who seemed to be the only one who understood the cost. And he was armed with a power he could barely control, a power that belonged to the very ideal he was here to subvert. He looked up at the main UA building, its glass windows reflecting the setting sun. He was inside. The first barrier had been breached. Now the real work could begin. He had to master this power, analyze his peers, and understand the heart of this hero's society. And he had to do it all while pretending to be one of them. It was a lonely, dangerous path. But it was his.